السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل الغرب أعمى عيونه عن سفر المتطرفين من أراضيه إلى سوريا، ولكن تلك الخطوة المتعمدة باتت اليوم تفجر المجتمعات الغربية من الداخل. سفروا مئات النساء والفتيات اليافعات للالتحاق بتنظيم داعش الإرهابي. هذا الحراك وتداعياته على المجتمعات الغربية من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. لعل خطر الإسلام التكفيري سلك طريقه إلى قلب المجتمعات والعواصم الأوروبية قبل اليوم بزمن، وعن سابق إصرار وترصد، حتى بات يهدد البنية الاجتماعية والأمن والاستقرار في الغرب. الثأر من التحالف الدولي بقيادة أمريكا لضرب إرهابيي داعش في العراق قد يكون الذريعة لبداية تحركات هذه الخلايا النائمة في العواصم الغربية. هذا السيناريو الكابوسي تجلى في تصريحات الرسميين الأوروبيين التي قدرت أن أكثر من 3000 أوروبي متطرف انضموا إلى داعش، ومئات الأمريكيين أيضا يحاربون في صفوفه، وهذا يؤكد تدريب هؤلاء على أيدي داعش بغية إرسالهم بعد إذن لضرب المجتمعات والأمن في الغرب. معظم هؤلاء الأوروبيين بحسب تقارير صحفية هم من الجيل الثاني للمهاجرين أتوا إلى أوروبا والغرب من دول آسيوية وإفريقية. هذا التهديد بات اليوم لا يستهدف الأمن في أوروبا فحسب، بل أيضا يهدد فعالية عملية تكامل الأقليات الدينية والعرقية في أوروبا الغربية. علاوة على ذلك، يمكن لهؤلاء الإرهابيين الأوروبيين أن يضربوا أمن واستقرار أمريكا، لأنهم لا يحتاجون إلى سمة الدخول إلى الولايات المتحدة. أوروبا سجلت أكبر عدد من العائدين من صفوف داعش بين الدول الغربية. أول اعتداء إرهابي في الغرب مرتبط بالحرب على سوريا نفذه فرنسي من أصول جزائرية في أيار مايو المنصرم، حيث أردى 4 أشخاص قتلى في متحف يهودي في العاصمة البلجيكية بروكسل. ابنة السير هارولد بيلي المبعوث البريطاني الخاص إلى القاهرة أثناء أزمة قناة السويس، الباحثة والمعلقة في الشؤون السياسية المتعلقة بالمنطقة العربية وفلسطين فينيسا بيلي، كيف تصف تزايد أعداد الأوروبيين ولا سيما النساء والفتيات اليافعات ضمن صفوف تنظيم داعش الإرهابي، وإلى ماذا تعزو ذلك؟ وماذا عن إعادة الرهاب من الإسلام أو الإسلاموفوبيا إلى الواجهة بقوة في ظل الاعتداءات المتفرقة التي شهدتها العواصم الغربية في الأمس القريب؟ وكيف باستطاعة المرء في الغرب اليوم أن يفرق بين الإرهاب والمقاومة؟ Veteran Middle East commentator and independent campaigner from the UK, living in France, Zeinab Bili, welcome to The Inside.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure, ma'am. Well, Britain is part of the international coalition to hit on ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Despite all of this, there is a big, massive campaign and wave of recruitment in the UK society, and what is very ironic and what is very, mind-boggling is the recruitment of women, actually, and young girls. And The Guardian here reported that hundreds of girls and women are going missing in the West, reappearing later on in Iraq and Syria. Vanessa, has the society in the UK become that disintegrated? What is going on? Why are women resorting to this kind of path?
I think it's a really interesting subject, and it's very multi-layered. I think the one bit of information that really surprised me as well was that 25% of the women who are going are from France. Which in a country which is relatively oppressive of the Muslim society is quite surprising that there is this backlash, if you like, or this adherence to the caliphate, to the ISIS recruitment programs. What, to me, it's very obvious. We know that ISIS itself has very little root in Islam itself. We know for a fact that the ISIS soldiers are being trained in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, that they are being backed and funded and armed and supported by NATO, by the states, by the Gulf states. But when we go back to the recruitment, for me it's a much more insidious part of the Islamophobia that is sweeping the West and has been sweeping the West for a long time, and of course is fueled and engineered very much by the Zionist entity that is always behind whatever actions our governments take, be it the US or the UK, and now France. I mean, the Zionist lobby there is incredibly powerful. So for me, this is it's a very classic CIA operation in the sense that they are recruiting from within the country. So if you like, you know, all of these girls, when you read the reports, most of them have been recruited on social media by very well-heeled, well-oiled social media sites with very attractive Hollywood-type, almost Disney sort of version of what it will be like to be a part of the caliphate, to go and be a jihadi bride, to produce children to fight the jihad. You know, it's a very romanticized version of what ISIS actually is. And I think it's on many levels, it's an attack on Muslim society. If I take the UK, we look at the recruitment of these girls, not only the girls, the men as well. So we're already fragmenting the Muslim family. We're already infiltrating the family, and we're already taking the children from that family as regards recruitment, let's say. We are then creating a situation where we're creating the possibility to say there's a terror threat. We have possible people who've left the UK to go and fight in Syria or Iraq, but for ISIS or even for Al-Qaeda, I mean, there's very little difference. But we then create this situation where we can say there is a terror threat from these fighters returning to the UK and continuing their atrocities in the UK. So we create this bubble of fear, and which then allows the government to impose certain restricting laws that we're now seeing. The restriction on the freedom of speech, the restriction on being able to criticize the government, the restrictions on being able to talk openly about what is happening in the Middle East, for example. We're also
the Freedom Act in general.
Yeah, the Freedom Act, which Theresa May is now talking about bringing into the UK. I'll get on to France in a minute as well, because there's a very similar knock-on effect there as well.
Yes.
But we're also seeing now this reaction from the Muslim society, which is becoming very withdrawn and very apologetic about what is happening. And this has been my strong point, is that Muslim society should not be apologizing for what is being done in their name by ISIS, because because this is not in the name of Islam. No, absolutely not. I mean, anybody, even if you're just on the periphery of Islam, you should know, or we should know, that what they are doing, the atrocities they are perpetrating in both Syria and Iraq, has no coherence with Islam whatsoever.
With the humanity, actually.
Absolutely not. No, no. Even if we draw back from Islam, but the problem is that the media slant is always that these are extremist Islamists, these are jihadists, and I hate using that word.
The terminology that they are trying, you know, to disseminate, and they link it to terror and also to Islam, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Now, allow me here to move on to talk a bit about numbers. It was very appalling. I mean, the Daily Telegraph in a report said that 2,000 Britons fighting alongside ISIS. Other reports said that around 60 Germans were killed fighting alongside ISIS, and 300 Swedes are fighting also with ISIS, according to Swedish head of intelligence. And at least 100 girls and young women from France have recently left to Syria. And you talked about the French society, what type of society it is. Western counterintelligence or counterterrorism officials, excuse me, said quote, the US airstrikes carried out against ISIS are likely to have one unintended consequence: immediately increase the terrorist threat in Europe and the United States. And they add, 1,000 European extremists are believed to have joined ISIS. This combination of threats was described by US Attorney General Eric Holder as, quote, more frightening than anything I think I've seen as Attorney General, in an interview that he gave to the ABC News several weeks ago. What on earth is going on, and how could this be, stopped?
Combated. I think I think what is very important, if we consider the fact that there may be legitimate recruitment cells going on, but I think the majority of it is being engineered and manipulated. So, in my opinion, we have to address the issues why these young people are being able to be recruited. Why are they not being educated and
aware?
Being made aware of what the situation is. So then we have to extrapolate it back, if you like, and say it must begin in the masjids. It must begin at
the
root
mosque.
level. And so if we assume that the media is basically propagating these rumors and instilling this desire to go and combat in Syria and to take part in this creation of the caliphate and to support the jihad there, then we have to combat that, because we know that this is pretty nefarious. I mean, we know that much of the media is Zionist-owned. We know that most of it will have a degree of propaganda behind it and a narrative that they want us to take on board. So, in my opinion, we have to start creating a scenario in which the imams and the masjids and within the family, that this awareness is created, and that these young people have an opportunity to talk to their imam or to go to the masjid and actually receive correct education. In other words, yes, in every country we have a dissatisfied youth, but particularly I think within Muslim society,
the youth, the youth margin is very dangerous. I mean, this could make the societies implode.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And if you have the young girls who are then producing children, which we're hearing all the time that the ISIS fighters are taking up to 2 or 3 brides, and they're being used to produce children. I mean, it's a hideous scenario, actually. And so I think that it's on various levels that we can combat it. We have to combat it at the root source. In other words, why are these children, really? I mean, I was reading a report just now, 13-14-year-old
and 14-year-old children.
And they're not even coming from extremist or very fundamental Islamic families. Quite often they're very liberal families who actually do not have a very strict...
This is my question here, is that we cannot understand that's why I asked you, what on earth is going on? How did people coming from such kind of families go to the extreme behavior?
It's really, I mean, psychologically it's really interesting. All I can say is that when you look at or when you read about some of the recruitment cells, they're very clever in how they're doing it. I mean, they're creating this image, particularly in Syria, of this, like I said, almost a Walt Disney version of what is actually happening. And I read one disturbing comment from a French minister where he said that basically the girls are even sort of being attracted by the idea of the beheadings and the I mean, it all I can think, I haven't seen any of the recruitment pages on Facebook, for instance, or anything like this.
Allow me here to talk about the issue of the beheadings, and it's like theatrical ISIS beheadings, and one on the hands of a British national and the other on the hand of a French one, executing the slaughter of the journalists. How did the societies in the UK, in France, elsewhere in Europe, welcome this issue that a Westerner is beheading another Westerner, a journalist?
as in the UK backed. Well, I think then you've got the power of the media, because I don't think anybody in the UK is seeing what is really happening. They're simply hearing that ISIS terrorists are beheading British nationals or American nationals or, as you say, French nationals in Algeria. But what, of course, is being forgotten is the daily atrocities against the Syrian civilians or the Syrian journalists or the Syrian women and children. You know, this is not reported, or even the suspected attack on or the murder of Serena Shim. You know, again, she is an American citizen.
The Press TV journalist,
yeah,
yes, yes.
Nothing, it wasn't even reported in mainstream media for about 48 hours. She's an American citizen.
And she's a mother of 2 kids,
Absolutely.
2 lovely kids.
And it's very important, she's an American citizen.
She's an American
citizen.
You
know, if this were a death, and, you know, may her soul rest in peace, but if this were a death that served the propaganda, that served the narrative that they're trying to give us, there would have been immediate outrage.
Actually, we paid tribute to Serena Sham, a Press TV reporter who died just a couple of months ago. And we hope that journalists will stop facing such kind of atrocities committed against those people who are trying to tell us what's happening actually in these parts of the world. We're going to stop now, Vanessa, for a short break, and then when we come back we'll talk about a bit more about the swell of Islamophobia and the EU laws on immigration, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. كيف يمكن أن يفرق المرء اليوم بين الإرهاب والمقاومة في الغرب؟ بحسب الباحثة البريطانية المقيمة في فرنسا فينيسا بيلي. وكيف تصف تضخم ظاهرة الرهاب من الإسلام أو الإسلاموفوبيا وقوانين الاتحاد الأوروبي المتعلقة بالهجرة؟
The swell of Islamophobia, I mean, this is something that has been definitely happening for the last few years, definitely, and it's been escalating and escalating. And as I say, you know, since 9/11, really, we've seen the escalation in, as you say, the use of the term terrorist is used to create an atmosphere of fear in which people begin to turn against a certain sector of society. And certainly this has been used along with certain economical problems and you know, the sort of situation that automatically makes people become more nationalistic. And in becoming more nationalistic, they like to have somebody to blame. And in my opinion, the governments have made it very, very easy for them to blame the Muslims, you know, and for them to create an atmosphere in which anything that is deemed
there has to be an enemy created, and Islam fits.
Absolutely, and Islam fits the bill. You know, it fits the bill perfectly for, as we know, the Zionist-funded governments, not only in America. I mean, we all know about the influence, the heavy influence of the Zionist lobby. I mean, the American government is under siege to Zionism. We know this. But even in the UK, if we look at any of the 3 parties, political parties, we see the affiliation to, for instance, the Conservative Friends of Israel or the Labour Friends of Israel or the Liberal Democratic Friends of Israel. Well, in the Conservative Party, it's over 80% are members. Even in Labour or Liberal Democrat, you have a membership of around 37 to 40%. So the Israeli influence within that government is enormous. So to me, it's logical that if they're going to achieve anything by this, it's a form of, it's this wave of Islamophobia and this turning against the Muslim society. And as I said, the use of the terror threat to create an atmosphere within the Muslim society of almost having to apologize again, as it was after 9/11, feeling to blame for what is happening in the world. And that's where this education aspect has to come in, and we have to start saying, look, you're not to blame for anything. You're perfectly legitimate citizens in this society, and as such, you don't have to apologize for what is being done in your name by actually what is US and UK government-funded actions.
Here, Vanessa, in your societies, in the UK, for example, in France, where you are living now, how can one differentiate between, as I said, between terrorism and resistance, which is a fair cause?
Yeah, absolutely.
How can you draw the line between both?
I think very fundamentally, you have to look at what the actions are being carried out and why they're being carried out. If we look in Syria, even if we look in Ukraine, for example, as soon as we see a regime change that benefits the Western powers, i.e. NATO, the Zionists, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, as soon as we see something like that, then in my opinion, whoever is trying to achieve that regime change are the terrorists. Those who are resisting are the resistance. And that's, but of course, the media is giving you completely the diametrically opposite version. And in fact, it's the resistance who become terrorists, and it's the perpetrators of the violence and the brutality.
Also, when it comes to the issue of the Palestinians here, for example, you are an activist for Gaza, and you also put forth a Facebook page, The Wall Will Fall. Okay, how did you come up with this idea, and for what purpose?
It was after I was in Gaza during the 2012 offensive, and I just felt so strongly that we needed to get across the human aspect of Palestine, not just Gaza, Palestine, and to get away from this fact that they don't have a right to resist, and to try and instill in people the impression that resistance is actually applicable in Gaza in particular. And if we take it back to France in particular, when they resisted the German occupation during the Second World War, there's no difference. But we've become so used to accepting the terminology and the sort of narrative that the government media is giving us, instead of realizing that actually Gaza is in a situation where resistance is an obligation. It's the only way they can defend themselves. And if we take it even further, in my opinion, Palestine is our human shield. It's a shield for humanity, because Palestine stands between us and the effects of Zionism. Because we can't fool ourselves that Zionism is going to stop at Palestine.
Here, Vanessa, you know, globalization, as we all know, has created an interconnected world, but it did not put an end to the violence or to militarism. Vijay Mehta's new book, The Economics of Killing, How the West Fuels Wars and Poverty in the Developing World, and we know that he's the president of the Mehta Center in the UK, describes how the power of global elites entrenched under globalization has created a deadly cycle of violence. What are the consequences of these endless wars the West has been fueling all over the place?
Yeah, I mean, the consequences are a complete sort of geopolitical seismo, earthquake, really. It depends. I mean, if we look into the Middle East, again, I think Arab nations have to take some responsibility for this, because we, or Arab nations, there is existing division within them. And of course that has been profited upon. And so those divisions have been, if you like, it's almost like tectonic plates, they've been pushed further apart. And this division and disunity and violence between factions in whichever countries, I mean, we can be talking about Africa, we can be talking about the Ukraine, we can be talking about
the Middle East.
Yeah. That they've almost just then pushed explosives into those moving plates and blown them apart. And we have to, somewhere along the line, we have to take steps to prevent this. The only way we can do it is through trying to raise awareness and trying to educate people. We're not at a level, or I'm certainly not at a level, where I can change policies or I can affect what is actually going on.
The civil society networks, perhaps, the NGOs, could do something in this regard.
Some of the NGOs, yes. Again, you have to go back. Who is governing
funding,
the NGOs?
who's
If we look at the World Health Organization, if we look at who has the biggest shareholding in those, they're not public bodies. That is Bill Gates and Unilever, and I think one or two others. But so straight away we see that they're not impartial bodies. We know that in certain cases, people like Avaz or Amnesty International are being used to propagate the Western narrative. So it's a case of awareness, and it's a case of questioning everything. And as I say, doing our best, particularly in the case of Palestine, to raise awareness in the West and to get away from this fear of saying we support the resistance. What they
against the whole family.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I think, we can't fool ourselves anymore. We have to accept the fact that Israel does not want a peace process. It's never wanted a peace process. It has destroyed the infrastructure in Gaza. It's left people completely imprisoned in an infrastructure that is non-existent. And with Israel still completely in control of everything, from water to food to electricity to economy. And then they've basically turned their attention to the West Bank. And to me, they're making life untenable. We're seeing more people trying to leave Gaza than ever before. So to me, this is a drive to drive the Palestinians out from Palestine, to make life so unbearable for them that actually they say, okay, we'll go. And we know about the negotiations.
But we all know also that the Palestinians have the spirit of Sumud inherent in their souls and their bodies. Yes, a veteran Middle East commentator and independent campaigner from the UK living in France, Vanessa Bيلي, many thanks indeed for joining us. You're most welcome. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.